The Wehrmacht deployed an astonishing variety of artillery during World War II, from nimble infantry support guns to monstrous railway cannons that shook the very earth beneath them. This video breaks down every important artillery piece they fielded across 6 years of devastating global conflict. These weapons formed the backbone of German firepower, responsible for the majority of battlefield casualties inflicted throughout the war. Let us begin with infantry support guns. The 7.5 cm leIG, Infanteriegeschütz 18, was the standard light infantry gun of the German army throughout the entire conflict. Rheinmetall began developing this weapon in 1927 under the deliberately misleading designation leichter Minenwerfer 18 to circumvent Treaty of Versailles restrictions on German weapons development. The Reichswehr formally adopted the design in 1932, recognizing its exceptional combination of firepower and portability. Weighing only 400 kilograms in combat configuration, this compact weapon was light enough for a small crew of just 5 men to manhandle across rough terrain when vehicles or horses were unavailable. Its unique shotgun-style breech mechanism employed a drop block that remained open until a fresh shell was loaded, with the rim of the cartridge case forcing the mechanism closed. This design allowed exceptionally rapid loading once crews became proficient with the system. The weapon could fire high-explosive shells out to 3,500 meters, providing direct support to infantry companies and battalions when divisional artillery was unavailable or unresponsive. Infantry regiments typically received 6 of these guns organized into an infantry gun company, giving frontline commanders organic firepower they could employ without waiting for requests to pass through higher headquarters. Over 9,000 were produced between 1939 and 1945, making it one of the most numerous German artillery pieces of the war. Specialized variants were developed for mountain troops and paratroopers, though neither achieved large-scale production. The gun served on every front from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen marshes of Finland, earning respect from crews who valued its reliability and effectiveness against enemy strongpoints. The 15 cm Schwerer Infanteriegeschütz 33 holds the distinction of being the largest weapon ever classified as an infantry gun by any nation in history. Development began during the 1920s when German military planners recognized the need for heavy firepower at the regimental level. The weapon entered service during the early 1930s and remained the standard heavy infantry gun throughout the war. Weighing approximately 1,800 kilograms, it packed devastating firepower into a weapon theoretically under the control of regimental commanders rather than divisional artillery staffs. The gun could lob an 84-pound high-explosive shell in a high arc over 4,700 meters, dropping destruction onto targets sheltered behind hills, buildings, or fieldworks. Against fortified positions and bunkers, it proved absolutely lethal. A few well-placed rounds could demolish small buildings and collapse trenches, eliminating strongpoints that would otherwise require costly infantry assaults. German engineers also developed a specialized stick bomb weighing 90 kilograms for use against wire obstacles and minefields. This massive projectile could clear lanes through defensive barriers that smaller weapons could not touch. The gun's weight made mobility a constant challenge for infantry units that were largely dependent on horse-drawn transport. German engineers addressed this problem by mounting the 15 cm SIG-33 on various tank chassis throughout the war. The first such adaptation placed the weapon atop the tiny Panzer I chassis in early 1940, creating an improbably tall self-propelled gun that nevertheless provided mobile heavy firepower. Later versions utilized the Panzer II and Panzer III chassis with progressively better results. Approximately 4,600 15 cm SIG-33 guns were produced during the war. They saw action on every front from Poland in 1939 to the final defense of Berlin in 1945. Next on the list is field artillery, the guns that formed the backbone of German divisional firepower throughout the conflict. The 10.5 cm leichte Feldhaubitze 18 formed the true backbone of German divisional artillery from the war's beginning to its end. Adopted into service in 1935 following extensive testing, this weapon replaced the older leichte Feldhaubitze 16 that had served during World War I. Over 1,000 horse-drawn, light field artillery battalions equipped with these howitzers served in the Wehrmacht during the conflict. At the outbreak of war in September 1939, the German army possessed approximately 4,862 of these weapons, ready for action. The standard 10.5 cm leichte Feldhaubitze 18 could fire a 14.81 kg high-explosive shell out to 10,675 meters. This range proved adequate for most tactical situations during the early campaigns, but revealed limitations against Soviet artillery on the Eastern Front. Horse-drawn batteries required over 100 personnel, including drivers, handlers, and gun crews. Each gun needed a 6-horse team for transport, along with limbers carrying ready ammunition. Motorized versions towed by half-track prime movers offered far greater mobility and required fewer personnel. A motorized battery possessed a radius of action 10 times greater than a horse-drawn equivalent, while needing 49 fewer soldiers. The motorized howitzers could maintain march speeds of 40 km per hour when towed by the SDKFZ-6 or SDKFZ-11 half-tracks. These weapons served on every front throughout the war, from the sands of North Africa, where the 33rd Artillery Regiment of the 15th Panzer Division employed them against British armour at Sidi Rezeg in November 1941, to the frozen steppes of Russia, where horse-drawn batteries often had to be abandoned during the terrible winter of 1941–42. The 10.5 cm leichte Feldhaubitze 18/40 was an improved variant developed when the limitations of the original design became apparent on the Eastern Front. Soviet artillery frequently outranged German guns, forcing infantry divisions to fight at a significant disadvantage. This improved version combined the 10.5 cm barrel with the carriage of the 10 cm Cannoni 18, creating a weapon with substantially greater range. Maximum range increased to approximately 12,340 meters with standard ammunition, allowing German batteries to engage Soviet positions from safer distances. Production commenced in 1942 and continued until the war's end. The new model required somewhat more effort to manufacture, but provided divisional artillery with the range necessary to compete with Soviet counterparts. The 10.5 cm leichte Feldhaubitze 18M added a muzzle brake to the original design, increasing range to 12,325 meters without requiring the more complex carriage modification. This variant proved easier to produce than the 18/40, while still addressing the range limitations that plagued German artillery on the Eastern Front. The 15 cm Schwerer Feldhaubitze 18 served as the standard heavy howitzer at both divisional and corps level throughout the war. Weighing 5,512 kilograms in firing position, this powerful weapon could throw a 43.5 kilogram high-explosive shell out to 13,250 meters. Each standard infantry division received 1 battalion of these heavy howitzers, alongside 3 battalions of the lighter 10.5 cm weapons. The typical organization placed 12 15 cm howitzers in a single battalion with 3 4-gun batteries. Panzer and motorized divisions received similar allocations, though their heavy howitzers were motorized for greater mobility. The gun performed admirably in both offensive and defensive operations throughout the war. During the early blitzkrieg campaigns, the 15 cm howitzers provided the heavy preparatory fires that shattered enemy defensive positions before armored spearheads advanced. On the Eastern Front, these same weapons delivered crushing bombardments against Soviet fortifications during siege operations. However, the gun's substantial weight created severe mobility problems during the mud seasons that plagued operations in Russia. Horses and even half-tracks struggled to extract emplaced weapons from deep mud, forcing crews to abandon their pieces during retreats. Over 6,600 15 cm Schwerer Feldhaubitze 18 howitzers were produced during the war. Many were also exported to German allies including Finland, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Spain. The 7.5 cm Feldkanone 38 was a relatively light field gun designed primarily for motorized and mountain units that needed greater mobility than the heavier howitzers could provide. Weighing approximately 1,430 kilograms in firing position, this weapon fired a 5.83 kilogram high-explosive shell at high velocity, out to 12,500 meters. The gun featured a slotted cylindrical muzzle brake to manage recoil forces and split trails of riveted box construction for stability during firing. Though produced in smaller numbers than the standard howitzers, the 75mm field gun provided German forces with a capable direct-fire weapon when tactical situations demanded flat trajectory engagement of visible targets. Let us move on to heavy artillery, the powerful guns that delivered crushing bombardments at corps and army level. The 10cm Schwerer Gustav 18 provided corps and army-level artillery with exceptional range capabilities. This gun could reach targets over 19,000 meters away, substantially outranging most contemporary artillery pieces employed by Germany's opponents. Its high velocity made it effective against both fortifications and armored vehicles when necessity demanded direct fire employment. The combination of range and hitting power allowed German commanders to engage enemy headquarters, supply dumps, and artillery positions, while keeping their own guns beyond the reach of counter-battery fire. The weapon required substantial prime movers for transport, typically the half-tracked tractor designated SDKFZ-7 or larger vehicles. Setting up for firing required considerable time and effort, limiting the gun's utility in mobile operations but making it invaluable during positional warfare and siege operations. The 15cm Kanone 18 was among the heaviest artillery pieces regularly assigned to German corps-level artillery units. This powerful weapon could throw a 43-kilogram shell over 24,000 meters, providing commanders with the ability to strike targets deep behind enemy lines. Supply dumps, rail junctions, troop assembly areas, and enemy artillery positions all fell within its reach. The gun required significant preparation time to emplace and displace, with crews needing several hours to prepare a firing position and return the weapon to travel configuration. This limitation reduced its utility in mobile operations, but made it devastating during set-piece battles and siege operations. Corps artillery, equipped with these weapons, delivered crushing preparatory bombardments before major offensives, shattering enemy defensive positions and interdicting reinforcement routes. The 15cm Kanone 39 was a Krupp design that entered service later in the war with improved range capabilities. This weapon could fire a 43-kilogram shell over 24,700 meters, extending the reach of corps heavy artillery. The improved range came at the cost of additional weight and complexity, but the ability to strike deeper into enemy rear areas proved valuable during both offensive and defensive operations. The 17cm Kanone 18 in Mortars represented the heaviest field artillery piece regularly produced by Germany during the war. This massive gun fired a 68-kilogram shell out to 29,600 meters. Its combination of heavy projectile and extreme range allowed it to engage enemy artillery positions, fortifications, and critical infrastructure while remaining safely beyond counter-battery fire. Assembly and emplacement required substantial effort, with special equipment needed to handle the weapon's heavy components. Only limited numbers were produced due to the enormous manufacturing resources required, but those that reached the front delivered crushing bombardments against enemy positions. The weapon proved particularly valuable during siege operations, where its ability to reduce fortifications from long range minimized German casualties. The 21cm Mortar 18 was a heavy howitzer, specifically designed for destroying fortifications that lighter weapons could not touch. This weapon fired a 121-kilogram shell in a high arc, achieving excellent accuracy against fixed positions at ranges up to 16,700 meters. Its massive shells could penetrate reinforced concrete bunkers and fortifications that shrugged off smaller caliber weapons entirely. The gun saw extensive service during the sieges of Sevastopol and Leningrad on the Eastern Front, where its crushing firepower helped reduce Soviet defensive works that had resisted all lighter artillery. Production continued throughout the war, with the weapons serving primarily in specialized heavy artillery units assigned to corps and army-level commands. Continuing with anti-tank guns, the specialized weapons developed to counter enemy armor. The 3.7cm Panzerabwehrkanone 36 was the standard German anti-tank gun when the war began in September 1939. Developed by Rheinmetall starting in 1933, this weapon entered service with the reborn Wehrmacht in 1936. By the war's outbreak, over 9,000 were available to German units, with an additional 5,000 produced during the conflict. The gun first saw combat during the Spanish Civil War beginning in 1936, where it performed excellently against the light tanks of that conflict. Against Polish forces in September 1939, it again proved adequate, defeating the armour of Polish tankettes and light tanks without serious difficulty. The May 1940 campaign in France revealed the gun's limitations against heavier armour. British Matilda Mark II infantry tanks and French Char B1 heavy tanks proved nearly impervious to its 37mm shells from most angles. Only careful flanking shots against thinner side or rear armour could achieve penetrations. The campaign in Russia, beginning in June 1941, demonstrated conclusively that the weapon had become obsolete against modern armour. When German units encountered Soviet T-34 medium tanks and KV series heavy tanks, the Pak-36 proved essentially useless against their sloped and thick armour. Frustrated crews gave the gun the mocking nickname Karl-Gerät, which translates roughly as army door-knocking device. Desperate soldiers sometimes fired entire belts of ammunition at approaching Soviet tanks without achieving a single penetration. Despite these limitations, the gun remained in service until 1942 with some units, because nothing better was available. Introduction of the steel granite 40, one-shaped charge round in early 1942 provided surviving guns with new anti-armour capability. This hollow charge projectile could penetrate up to 180 mm of armour, regardless of its thickness, but the projectile's low velocity limited effective range to only 300 meters, a dangerously close distance when facing enemy tanks. The Pak-36's light weight of only 432 kilograms made it valuable for airborne and light infantry units where heavier weapons could not be deployed. Many were removed from their carriages and mounted on half-tracks for use as light anti-armour support. The 5-centimetre Panzerabwehrkanone 38 entered service in April 1941 as a replacement for the obsolete 37mm gun. Rheinmetall began developing this weapon in 1938, after recognizing that the smaller caliber would soon prove inadequate against improving tank armour. The new gun featured a distinctive curved gun shield that differentiated it from most contemporary anti-tank weapons using flat plates. Its 50mm projectile, fired at high velocity, provided substantially greater armour penetration than the old 37mm round. When German forces encountered Soviet T-34 tanks during Operation Barbarossa, beginning in June 1941, the Pak-38 was one of the few guns capable of penetrating their 45mm sloped armour at combat ranges. Special tungsten core Panzergranit 40 ammunition provided even greater penetration, allowing the gun to defeat the heavy KV-1 tank's armour under favourable conditions. However, tungsten shortages meant this special ammunition was always in critically short supply. Though eventually superseded by larger weapons, the Pak-38 remained in service until the end of the war, valued for its mobility at 986 kilograms and reliability under harsh field conditions. Romania purchased 110 Pak-38 guns in March 1943, demonstrating continued demand for this proven weapon, even as heavier guns entered service. The 7.5-centimetre Panzerabwehrkanone 40 became the standard German anti-tank gun from 1942 onward, and remained so until the war's end. Development began in 1939 as a scaled-up version of the Pak-38 design. Contracts went to both Krupp and Rheinmetall to develop what was essentially a 75mm version of the proven 50mm weapon. However, the light alloys that reduced the Pak-38's weight were now reserved for aircraft production, forcing the Pak-40 to use steel throughout its construction. This made the new gun proportionally heavier than its predecessor. The curved gun shield was also replaced by 3 flat plates to simplify production. The weapon entered production in late 1941, with first deliveries reaching frontline units in early 1942. Its 75mm gun could defeat virtually any Allied tank at normal combat ranges throughout the war. Only the heaviest Soviet vehicles like the IS-2 and IS-3 heavy tanks, the American M4, A3E2, Sherman Jumbo Assault Tank, and M26 Pershing, and late variants of the British Churchill required careful shot placement or close-range engagement. Over 23,000 Pak-40 guns were produced, with an additional approximately 3,500 barrels prepared for mounting on self-propelled tank destroyers. The weapon weighed over 1,400 kilograms, substantially limiting the ability of crews to reposition during battle without mechanical assistance. On soft or muddy ground, the Pak-40 became virtually immobile without an artillery tractor. This reduced mobility was accepted as a necessary trade-off for the devastating anti-armor performance the gun provided. Unit manufacturing cost amounted to 2,200 man-hours at 12,000 Reichsmarks. The usual prime movers included the Opel Blitz truck, Raupenschlepper Ost tracked tractor, SDKFZ 11 medium half-track, and SDKFZ 251 armored half-track. After the war, the Pak-40 remained in service with several European armies, including Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Finland, Norway, Hungary, and Romania. The 7.62 cm Panzerabwehrkanone 36R was an expedient solution born from desperation on the Eastern Front. When the Wehrmacht captured large numbers of Soviet 76 mm divisional guns, Model 1936, designated F-22 by the Soviets, German engineers recognized their potential. The original Soviet design had been intended to fire more powerful cartridges than were ultimately adopted. By reboring the chamber to accept a larger propellant charge and fitting a muzzle brake, German ordnance experts transformed these captured weapons into highly effective anti-tank guns. Conversions began reaching frontline units in February 1942, just as German forces desperately needed heavier anti-tank weapons to combat the T-34 and KV series tanks that had shattered so many Pak-36 crews. By March 1942, the converted guns were already in action at Bir Hachaim in Libya, and by May of that year, 117 were serving with the Afrika Korps. The gun proved its worth repeatedly, with gunner Gunter Halm destroying 7 British tanks from the 23rd Armoured Brigade at Ruwaysat Ridge in a single engagement during the First Battle of El Alamein, an achievement that earned him the Knight's Cross at just 19 years of age. By the end of 1942, 358 conversions had been completed, with another 169 in 1943 and 33 in 1944. The modernized barrels also equipped the Marder II and Marder III tank destroyers, extending the weapon's service to armored vehicle-mounted configurations. As late as March 1945, the Wehrmacht still possessed 165 Pak-36R and related Pak-39R guns. The 8.8 cm Panzerabwehrkanone 43 represented the ultimate development of German towed anti-tank guns. This massive weapon fired the same ammunition as the Tiger II tank's main gun and the heavy Flak 41 anti-aircraft gun. Its ballistic performance allowed it to destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters with virtual certainty. The huge 71 caliber barrel generated tremendous muzzle velocity, allowing shells to penetrate armor that stopped rounds from shorter guns. This devastating performance came at the cost of enormous weight, over 4 tons in firing position. The weapon became nearly impossible to maneuver without mechanical assistance and extremely difficult to conceal in fighting positions. Its bulk made it vulnerable to counter-fire and air attack. Production therefore focused on vehicle-mounted versions, including the Nashorn and Jagdpanther tank destroyers, rather than the towed variant. Those towed Pak-43 guns that reached field service earned fearsome reputations among Allied tank crews who learned to respect the range at which these weapons could kill. Next on the list is anti-aircraft artillery, the guns that defended German forces from increasingly powerful Allied air attacks. The 2 cm Flak 30 and Flak 38 series became the most produced German artillery piece of the entire war. Developed for air defense against low-flying aircraft, these automatic cannons fired 20 mm shells at cyclic rates of 450 rounds per minute for the Flak 30 and 480 rounds per minute for the improved Flak 38. The single-barrel weapons proved effective against low-flying aircraft, ground attack planes, and soft ground targets alike. Production reached into the tens of thousands as Germany struggled to defend against increasingly devastating Allied air attacks. A quad-mounted version, called the Flakvierling, combined 4 barrels into a single devastating platform. This weapon could pump out 1,800 rounds per minute, creating an almost impenetrable wall of explosive shells against low-flying aircraft. Allied ground attack pilots learned to respect these weapons, which could shred an aircraft in seconds if it flew into their field of fire. The Flak also proved devastatingly effective against ground targets, including infantry, light vehicles, and even lightly armored reconnaissance vehicles. The 3.7 cm Flak 18, 36, 37, and 43 series provided medium-range air defense against aircraft flying at altitudes beyond the reach of 20 mm weapons. These automatic cannons offered greater range and hitting power while maintaining reasonable rates of fire between 150 and 250 rounds per minute, depending on the model. A single 37 mm hit usually sufficed to destroy or cripple most aircraft, while the 20 mm weapons often required multiple hits to achieve kills. The guns proved particularly effective against medium bombers and ground attack aircraft, forcing them to operate from higher altitudes, where bombing accuracy suffered significantly. Ground forces appreciated the 37 mm weapons for their ability to engage light armored vehicles and fortifications in addition to aircraft. The 8.8 cm Flak 18, 36, and 37 is arguably the most famous artillery piece of World War II, and certainly one of the most versatile weapons ever fielded. Originally designed as an anti-aircraft gun during the 1920s, development was conducted secretly in Sweden by Krupp engineers cooperating with Bofors to circumvent Treaty of Versailles restrictions on German weapons development. After rejecting 75 mm designs, the team settled on 88 mm, a caliber long favoured by the Imperial German Navy. The prototype, Flak 18, appeared in 1928. Following Hitler's rise to power in 1933, Germany rapidly rearmed, and over 2,500 Flak 18, or improved Flak 36 and 37 models were in service when World War II began. The weapon first saw combat during the Spanish Civil War beginning in 1936, where the German Condor Legion deployed mobile flak detachments. These weapons proved accurate and versatile, establishing the foundation for their legendary reputation. As an anti-aircraft weapon, the 88 could engage aircraft at effective ranges exceeding 26,000 feet, with a maximum ceiling of 32,000 feet. Fire control came via central transmission systems connected to Karl-Gerät 40 fire control computers, or portable Wurzburg radar. Batteries of 4 guns typically deployed in square formations for the anti-aircraft role. However, the gun achieved legendary status through its employment against ground targets. During the campaign in France in May 1940, German commanders discovered that the 88 could destroy heavily armoured Allied tanks that shrugged off standard anti-tank weapons. At Arras on May 21, 1940, Matilda tanks slammed into the German 7th Panzer Division, causing panic until 88s were brought forward to stop them. The 88mm gun could penetrate the Matilda's 78mm of frontal armour that had stopped every other German weapon. In North Africa, the 88 established its reputation as the ultimate tank killer. At Halfaya Pass during Operation Battleaxe in June 1941, 5 well-concealed 88s commanded by Captain Wilhelm Bach decimated attacking British Matildas from the 4th Royal Tank Regiment. Of the 18 Matildas committed to the assault on the pass, 11 were destroyed by the dug-in flak guns, their thick armour proving worthless against the high-velocity 88mm shells. Across the entire 3-day battle, German defensive positions, equipped with 13 88s at Halfaya Pass, Hafid Ridge, and supporting the 8th Panzer Regiment, destroyed scores of British tanks, contributing to total British losses of over 90 tanks. Against the Soviet T-34 and KV-1 tanks on the Eastern Front, the 88 often provided the only reliable kill capability available to German forces. One 88mm gun near Salerno in Italy displayed 44 kill rings on its barrel, each representing a tank destroyed. Over 21,000 88mm flak guns were produced throughout the war, with many serving simultaneously in air defense and ground combat roles. The gun's success led to development of tank-mounted variants, including the 8.8 cm KWK-36 for the Tiger I tank and the 8.8 cm KWK-43 for the Tiger II. The 8.8 cm Flak 41 was an improved design developed by Rheinmetall using more powerful ammunition with longer cartridge cases. This weapon offered greater range and velocity than the earlier models, reaching higher altitudes with better accuracy. However, the design proved complex and difficult to manufacture. Production problems meant only a few hundred reached service compared to the thousands of earlier variants produced. Those that did enter combat performed well, but never achieved the legendary status of their predecessors. The 10.5cm Flak 38 and 39 provided protection against high-altitude bombers that flew above the effective ceiling of 88mm weapons. These large guns could engage aircraft at extreme altitudes where smaller calibers proved ineffective. Their size and complexity limited production numbers significantly, but batteries, equipped with these weapons, defended the most critical strategic targets throughout the Reich, including aircraft factories, synthetic fuel plants, and major transportation hubs. The 12.8cm Flak 40 was the largest German anti-aircraft gun to see widespread deployment during the war. Capable of reaching aircraft at altitudes exceeding 14,000 meters, this massive weapon defended only the most important targets in Germany. Twin-mounted versions installed in the massive concrete flak towers constructed around Berlin, Hamburg, and Vienna created nearly impenetrable defensive zones. Allied bomber crews dreaded these massive guns, whose heavy shells could destroy aircraft with near misses that smaller weapons required direct hits to match. The psychological effect of facing these enormous weapons added to their defensive value. Let us move on to rocket artillery, a field where German innovation created devastating weapons. The 15cm Nebelwerfer 41 was the first German rocket launcher to achieve mass production and widespread deployment. Despite its name meaning fog thrower, which referenced the Nebeltruppen unit's original smoke-laying mission, this weapon delivered devastating high-explosive bombardments. The first weapons were delivered to troops in 1940, following the conclusion of the French campaign. 6 launch tubes mounted on a modified 3.7cm Pak 36 anti-tank gun carriage could fire a complete salvo in approximately 10 seconds, saturating a target area with nearly 200 kilograms of high explosives before enemy counter-battery fire could respond. The spin-stabilized rockets achieved better accuracy than many contemporary rocket systems, though they remained area weapons rather than precision munitions. A unique feature placed the rocket motor in the front of the projectile with the warhead in the rear, intended to maximize the blast effect, as the warhead would detonate above ground level. This complicated manufacturing for little extra effect and was not repeated in later designs. The rockets produced a distinctive wailing sound during flight that earned them the Allied nicknames Screaming Mimi and Moaning Minnie. Over 5,200 launchers and more than 5 million rockets were produced during the war. The psychological effect of rocket bombardment often exceeded the physical damage. Troops subjected to massed salvos frequently broke and fled even when actual casualties were relatively light. The weapon saw service on every front from North Africa to Normandy and throughout the Eastern Front. The 21cm Nebelwerfer 42 provided heavier firepower using a slightly modified carriage. This 5-tube launcher fired larger rockets with correspondingly greater explosive effect. Each rocket weighed approximately 109.5 kilograms and delivered a significantly larger warhead than the 15cm weapon. Range extended to nearly 8,000 meters, allowing batteries to engage targets deeper behind enemy lines than the smaller rockets could reach. The Luftwaffe adapted this rocket as the Werfer Grenade 21 for air-to-air use against Allied bomber formations, fitting single launch tubes to fighters and heavy fighters. Between 1,400 and 1,600 launchers were produced between 1942 and 1945. The 28 and 32cm Nebelwerfer 41 fired massive rockets from simple wooden crating frames rather than specialized launch tubes. The 28cm variant carried high explosive warheads, while the 32cm version delivered incendiary charges filled with petroleum. These weapons required no specialized launcher equipment, since the rockets could be fired directly from their transport crates, stacked on simple steel frames. This simplified logistics enormously, allowing batteries to operate with minimal specialized equipment. However, accuracy suffered compared to tube-launched rockets stabilized by their launch rails. The weapons proved most effective as area bombardment systems, where precision was less critical than sheer volume of explosives delivered. The 15-centimeter Panzerwerfer 42 mounted a 10-tube launcher on an armored Moltier half-track chassis. This combination provided mobile rocket artillery capable of keeping pace with panzer divisions during offensive operations. The armored cab protected the crew from small arms fire and shell fragments during the vulnerable reloading process. Elevation could reach 80 degrees, and traverse covered 270 degrees, allowing engagement of targets across a wide arc without repositioning the vehicle. Approximately 300 were produced between April 1943 and March 1945, serving primarily with Panzer and Panzer Grenadier divisions that needed organic rocket support. The 30-centimeter Nebelwerfer 42 was a larger rocket system developed from the earlier 28 and 32-centimeter weapons. This improved design offered better accuracy and range while maintaining the devastating effect of its predecessors. The larger caliber allowed heavier warheads to be delivered against fortifications and troop concentrations. Next on the list is railway artillery, the massive guns that delivered unprecedented firepower. The 28-centimeter Kanone 5 provided the Wehrmacht with mobile heavy artillery of unprecedented power that could strike targets at extreme ranges. Mounted on railway carriages, this gun could fire a 255-kilogram shell over 62,000 meters, placing targets far behind enemy lines within reach. Two famous examples earned the nicknames Anzio Annie and Anzio Express from Allied troops in Italy during 1944. These guns delivered harassing fire against the Anzio beachhead for months, their extreme range making counter-battery fire essentially impossible. The guns could fire from positions so far behind German lines that Allied artillery simply could not reach them. Moving these weapons required extensive planning and preparation. The guns needed special curved track sections called WWII turntables to provide traverse, as the weapons could only fire along the axis of their railway carriages. This limited flexibility but allowed the massive guns to be positioned in deep defiles and tunnels where enemy retaliation could not reach them. The 80-centimeter Kanone in Eisenbahn-Lafette, known by the names Schwerer, Gustav and Dora, represents the ultimate expression of railway artillery and the largest caliber rifled weapon ever employed in combat. Development began in 1934 when the German Army High Command commissioned Krupp to design a gun capable of destroying the French Maginot Line fortifications. The requirements specified penetration of 7 meters of reinforced concrete or 1 meter of armor plate from beyond the range of French counterfire. Krupp engineer Erich Müller calculated this would require a weapon of approximately 80 centimeters caliber firing 7-ton projectiles. The resulting weapon weighed over 1,350 tons, fully assembled, and measured 47.3 meters in length. Assembly required special tracks, massive cranes, and over 2,000 personnel working for several weeks. Krupp named the first gun Schwerer Gustav, after the senior director Gustav Krupp von Bohlen und Halbach. In keeping with company tradition, no payment was requested for the first gun. The second weapon, named Dora after the chief engineer's wife, cost 7 million Reichsmarks. The guns were not ready when Germany outflanked the Maginot Line during the 1940 campaign, removing their intended purpose. Schwerer Gustav finally saw action during the siege of Sevastopol in June 1942. The gun arrived in early March after transportation by 5 separate trains totaling 25 cars. Workers laid 1.2 kilometers of special access track, followed by parallel assembly tracks. Assembly took several weeks before firing commenced on June 5, 1942. The gun fired approximately 50 shells during the siege, including rounds against the coastal batteries Maxim Gorky 1 and Maxim Gorky 2. One shot penetrated 30 meters of earth to destroy an underground ammunition magazine beneath Severnaya Bay. High-explosive shells weighed 4,800 kilograms, while concrete-piercing shells weighed 7,100 kilograms. Maximum range reached 47 kilometers with the lighter shells. These weapons represented engineering marvels, but proved impractical for modern mobile warfare. The enormous resources required for transport, assembly, and operation delivered minimal strategic benefit compared to aircraft capable of delivering similar explosive payloads with far greater flexibility. Both guns were destroyed by German forces in 1945 to prevent capture, with fragments discovered by Allied troops near Grafenwöhr and north of Auerbach. Continuing with siege artillery, the specialized weapons designed to crack the strongest fortifications. The Karl-Gerät was the largest self-propelled artillery piece to see combat during World War II. Development began at Rheinmetall in 1936, based on the assumption that existing artillery would prove insufficient against the strongest fortifications, such as those of the French Maginot Line. The initial concept envisioned a weapon transported in sections and assembled on site, but lengthy preparation requirements prompted a change to self-propelled configuration in January 1937. The resulting vehicle weighed approximately 100 to 24 tons and mounted either a 60-centimeter mortar designated Gerät 040 or a 54-centimeter weapon designated Gerät 041. The 60-centimeter mortar could fire heavy concrete piercing shells weighing 2,170 kilograms or lighter shells weighing 1,250 kilograms. Maximum range for the lighter shells reached just over 10 kilometers. 7 vehicles were constructed between November 1940 and August 1941. Each received an individual name from Germanic mythology. These were Adam, later renamed Baldur, Eva, later renamed Wotan, Thor, Odin, Loki, and Zeus. The 7th vehicle was retained for testing and never received a name. These weapons first saw action at Brest-Litovsk on June 22, 1941, the opening day of Operation Barbarossa. 3 Karl mortars participated in the siege of Sevastopol, beginning in May 1942. Camouflaged firing positions measuring 15 meters long, 10 meters wide, and 3 meters deep were excavated for each weapon to minimize vulnerability to Soviet counterfire. Between June and July 1942, the mortars fired over 100 shells against Soviet fortifications. Their massive projectiles could penetrate up to 2.5 meters of reinforced concrete, cracking defensive works that had withstood every other weapon in the German arsenal. During the Warsaw Uprising in August 1944, Karl mortars bombarded the Polish capital. Many shells failed to detonate when striking buildings or soft ground. Polish resistance fighters disarmed several duds and extracted explosives to manufacture hand grenades. Only one Karl-Gerät survives today, Zeus repainted as Adam, on display at the Kubinka Tank Museum in Russia. The 42-centimeter Gamma mortar was a heavy siege weapon descended from World War I designs. These massive weapons could lob enormous shells against fortifications in high arcing trajectories, dropping devastation onto targets that direct fire weapons could not engage. Setup required substantial preparation, and the weapons remained vulnerable to air attack during the lengthy assembly process. Finally, we have mountain and specialized artillery developed for specific tactical requirements. The 7.5 centimeter Gebirgsgeschütz 36 was the standard German mountain howitzer throughout the war. Designed specifically for operations in rough terrain where conventional artillery could not follow, this weapon could be broken down into multiple loads for transport by pack mule or man-pack by infantry. Each component was sized to be carried by a single mule or a small team of soldiers. This portability made the weapon invaluable during operations in Norway, the Balkans, Italy, and the Caucasus Mountains. The gun sacrificed range and shell weight for portability, a necessary compromise for its specialized role. Mountain troops appreciated having organic artillery support in terrain where larger weapons could not operate. The 10.5 centimeter Gebirgshaubitze 40 provided mountain divisions with heavier firepower than the 75 mm gun, while maintaining reasonable portability. This howitzer could be broken down into transportable loads, yet delivered shells comparable to standard divisional artillery when assembled in firing position. The combination of portability and firepower gave mountain units organic, heavy fire support capability in terrain that excluded conventional weapons. The 7.5 cm Leichtgeschütz 40 was a recoilless rifle developed specifically for airborne operations where conventional artillery could not be delivered. By venting propellant gases rearward through venturi orifices to eliminate recoil, designers created a weapon light enough for paratroopers to carry yet powerful enough to engage fortifications, bunkers, and light vehicles. The absence of recoil forces eliminated the need for heavy carriages, dramatically reducing weight. The gun first saw action during the airborne assault on Crete in May 1941, providing paratroopers with fire support capability they desperately needed during the costly battle for the island. The 10.5 cm Leichtgeschütz 40 was a larger, recoilless rifle, offering greater firepower for airborne forces. Like its smaller counterpart, it eliminated recoil through gas venting, trading ammunition efficiency for reduced weight and easier handling during vertical envelopment operations. Paratroopers could deliver heavy fire support immediately upon landing, rather than waiting for conventional artillery to arrive by sea or overland. The Wehrmacht deployed artillery in ways that maximized its effectiveness across 6 years of devastating global conflict. From the smallest infantry support, guns that accompanied foot soldiers into battle, to monstrous railway cannons that required weeks to assemble, German artillery demonstrated remarkable variety and capability. Anti-tank guns evolved rapidly as Allied armor improved, beginning with 37mm weapons that became door-knockers and progressing to 88mm giants that could kill any tank at 2 kilometers. Anti-aircraft weapons defended the Reich against increasingly powerful bomber offensives, though ultimately they could not prevent the destruction of German cities and industries. Rocket artillery provided devastating area bombardment at lower cost than conventional tubes, terrifying enemy soldiers with screaming salvos that saturated target areas with high explosives. Siege weapons cracked fortifications that had defied lighter arms, though the resources consumed by weapons like Schwerer Gustav might have been better employed elsewhere. This video has covered the major artillery types employed by German forces during World War II, from the ubiquitous 88mm Flak gun that served as both anti-aircraft and anti-tank weapon, to the enormous Schwerer Gustav railway cannon that fired 7-ton shells nearly 50 kilometers. Each weapon played its role in the greatest conflict in human history, and their legacy continues to influence artillery development decades after the guns fell silent in May 1945.